Hello everyone, this is Tushar. Today we'll spend some time understanding how threads work, understand intuitively how to create new threads, as this is one of the most important concept for a software engineer. So the first question that comes to our mind is what are threads? So the way to visualize it is imagine you maybe printing out a statement, writing a function to print out a statement. Now, the smallest unit that can execute that, we can think of it like a thread. And intuitively, we can say that there could be a system that can arrange these small threads to increase the throughput. Let's now try to create a thread and then play around with it. So, whenever we think about creating a thread in Java, we know that there are two methods and there are couple of classes, which is runnable interface and a thread class, which everyone talks about. So what we'll do today is we'll try to look into the actual code of these and then try to build an intuition from there that how to create a thread and how it works. Let's look at the code of runnable interface. It's a functional interface. That means that it has only a single function, and that function is an abstract function. That means whichever class is implementing this interface has to implement this void run function. That is all what this class tells us right now. Now let's look at the thread class. We'll try to see on an Uber level what it does. We'll not deep dive into each and every line of code. But to start off, this class has excellent documentation around it, so feel free to go through it. But let's look at the line number 143. Now this class implements Runnable, the same interface that we saw before. So the first thing that comes to my mind is if it implements this interface, that means it would have also implemented a run function. That is part of the Runnable interface that we just saw right now. To recheck, I can just click on this and you can see yes. See, so this run function needs to be present in this thread class. What we can do is we can quickly search for that function. So yeah, we can see that this method is overridden, and what it does is they've created a target variable, which if it is not null, we run this. We can now check what the target is. To find out the target, we need to go at the top of the code. That's where usual declarations are. And see, this is again a variable with runnable class. So that means somehow we have to inject this runnable target into this thread class, and whenever we call run method, target.run method will be called. So we need to define this function somewhere and then pass it into this target variable. That is the intuition behind how this works. So now let's try to create a class which implements a runnable interface and then see how we can create a thread from it. So the first step is we need to override the run function and add our own custom implementation. And in this case, what we have done is simple system.out.print that inside run method. This is just a static void method so that we can test out the changes. So we have created this runnable thread. So now what we need to do is create a thread object and pass this create thread runnable interface object to it, because we know it implements the runnable interface and we have already overridden the run function. So we'll do thread custom thread equal to new thread. And you can see the compiler itself tells that there are multiple possible inputs that you can give based upon the constructors in the thread class. We can also look at what possible options do we have as constructors, because usually a class has multiple constructors. So what we can do is, let's say we don't want to pass anything, just remove everything else and just pass the runnable thread. The next thing that we have to do is custom thread and see what available functions do we have. So we have a start function. Just to test out what it shows, I'll run this function. You can see it returns inside run method. We'll now deep dive into how it worked. Now let's try to understand how this worked, how we were able to see the output inside run method. So now let's see and click on the start function that we have. Let's look at its documentation first. It says that it causes thread to begin execution. The JVM machine calls the run method of this thread. That means this start function is responsible for calling the run method. Now when we say run method, this is the run method that we have overridden. So if you see, thread class has its own run method, which we saw before. But what we are saying is that, hey, in our create thread runnable interface class, we are saying that, hey, we are overriding it. So this start function is responsible to call it. Let's deep dive a bit more into what this start function does. Let's look at line number 788. So this is a good paradigm of writing code. If you have any exceptions or any error scenarios, you just filter out them at the start. And let's say, imagine if thread status is not equal to 0, you can easily throw the exception and you don't need to traverse the rest of the code. We'll not deep dive into what these each statements mean, but just look at and get an idea of overall what it does. Overall, if you see, the line number 798 is very critical. It's a start 0 function. And after that, there is try catch only, which tries to catch the errors. So this start 0 function is where all the magic is happening. But the curious thing here is you will not be able to see the implementation of start 0 in this file anywhere. This is a native code. We'll deep dive into that later, how it works. But right now what we can think is the start function is responsible for calling the run function, which we override. So if I have to change the name here, what I can do is, you can see the ID is itself telling me that there is a constructor which has runnable target and string name as its parent. So let's say if I add custom thread 0 and now I run it, let's see what the output is. Now you can see the thread name is same as what I added here. So my intention here is to understand the thought process of how we can explore a new library. If we don't know much about thread class, see how we can play around with it, try to see the code. And the most important part is, even if you don't understand the complete code, just understanding few points can help implement dependent features like we are implementing right now. Now we have seen both the ways via which we can create a simple thread, and in later videos we'll see how we can play around with these threads, how we can add multiple threads. But the crux is that we need to figure out what use case suits us. So if you see the first, these are simple inheritance rules that apply here, and we need to be sure about, based upon our current situation, would extending a thread class help us more, or will implementing the runnable interface help?